This interview is making waves, and in my opinion, it is the start of the domino effect that's going to change the toxic exposure rules moving forward with this current administration. This is from News Nation, an interview with Dave Crete by Natasha Zuvez, and it is riveting. I wanted to react to this for you, but go watch the original interview in its full entirety because it's riveting stuff and really a heartbreaking message. But this is going to, I hope, shape the way we talk about these toxic exposures, and especially for things that, us veterans can no longer prove because either your records were lost, you weren't supposed to even exist in the location that you were existing in, or simply a misrepresentation of where you were in which location on record. This could help all of us. Here we go.
Hi there, I'm Natasha Zuvez. Veterans who served at Area 51 and a secretive range now say that they have one thing in common: cancer and other serious health issues. The question, how do you fight for your rights when your government won't even acknowledge that you were ever there?
They keep us classified to protect themselves.
That's the situation they're confronting right now. And Dave Crete is a veteran who founded the Invisible Enemy in order to fight and advocate for these veterans who are getting sick, many of whom are passing away.
Okay, this is something that I see happen so often. There are loads of veterans who get and become victims of basically covering for someone else. So whether that's our own government who wasn't supposed to be in a certain area, and they tell you, oh, just act like you were lost. Oh, you never existed. Sorry, you weren't actually there. There's no way we can grant your PTSD claim, whatnot. That absolutely happens. It happens a lot. That's another thing even, is getting, shots and whatnot, right? Some of these things have adverse effects, and a lot of the times there's no recourse, and especially no doctors that will go up to bat for you because it's considered taboo for certain shots. So it happens quite a bit.
He says the whole story began to unravel during a reunion barbecue in his own backyard. Here's our conversation. Dave Crete, it's so good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Natasha.
Dave, I want you to take me back to this barbecue. I believe there were 8 guys, all veterans who hadn't seen each other in decades. And what is the comment that one of your fellow vets made that just stopped you in your tracks?
We're sitting there. There's 8 guys in my backyard at the time. People are just showing up. And one of the guys asked if any of us had any tumors. And I piped up because not only do I have tumors, but I have a son with an issue. And I said, I do. I had to have surgery to get one removed from my back because it had gotten quite large. It was like the size of a grapefruit. And I said, then I have a bunch of others. I have like 25 others. From my forehead to my arms to my torso, whatever. We found I had one in my lungs recently. We found that out. But I had them. And then of the 8 guys in the backyard, 6 had tumors. A 7th guy spoke up and says, I don't, but my son, who was born back then, does. He was born with tumors, which piqued my interest really because I have a son that was born, our firstborn child, son David, was born with neurofibromatosis, which is a tumor condition. It's a genetic condition. And in our case, there's no genetic history. He has it, and it forms tumors on his nerve endings or in like where there's nerve masses, things like that. And he was born with one tumor that's in his brain. And they're benign, but they're there.
This is why videos like this are so important, especially as the new administration is looking so intently into the VA and how we do compensation, how we do, what waste is there, how are we going to reform the system or change it. Because the PACT Act was a big help for in terms of, hey, if you were in these areas, you were probably exposed to these toxins. We're going to grant that this caused your COPD. These burn pits, that we grant how this caused your asthma. There are thousands and thousands of veterans who were exposed to toxins, who were exposed to radioactive isotopes, and are turned away, treated like liars with tumors, even their kids getting sick, and are turned away because we're protecting someone else, right? We're covering for this secret or that secret. But my question is, why can't we, 1, keep our own folks safe, be in an area where they're not exposed to these things, or 2, there needs to be an expansion of the presumptive toxic exposure to be able to include folks like this because it's a huge issue.
And so my interest really got piqued because, you know, my son has had something that's been a life-altering issue for him. He's now, he's just 36. He's 36 right now. And so literally for all that time, he's had to deal with issues related to it. But I got very interested. And as we've moved on, we found that many of the others that we worked with did. But the one nexus for all of us was we all worked on NTTR, Nevada Test and Training Range. And in no other conversation that I'd ever been a part of had a question like that come up. And so that's why I got interested.
So right there, he mentioned the one nexus for all of us is we all worked on, you know, the Nevada Training Range. The term nexus is a VA disability term. All that means is service connection. So when he talks about the one nexus we all have in common, that means we were all working at this specific training area, and that's supposed to be the nexus, which in VA terms is how you're granted service connection.
And then when somebody else told me that their kid was born with a tumor problem, then I was even more interested.
I want you to talk to me about this top secret work, because all of you all were just young men, late teens, 20s, handpicked for this very top secret mission. How did it feel to be selected for this?
It is really a trip. It was very surreal going through this process of getting your security clearance. I went home at Christmas. I graduated my tech schools and everything, and I was on my way to Nellis, and Christmas fell in the middle, and I was home for Christmas. And half of my buddies from high school thought I must have been a criminal or something because I'd been investigated for something. My old employer, when I walked into the grocery store, questioned me about, and what did you do? Nothing. So that part was kind of a trip. That's when you first find out something has really gone on. We filled out stacks and stacks of papers to get our stuff.
Quick side note, I had a top secret SCI clearance in service, and those of you who are high clearance levels as well are very familiar with that. It seems like you're in huge trouble. Your friends are calling you saying an FBI agent showed up and whatnot. So that's just pretty interesting.
Actually, no, let me back up. When we would go to, there was an office on Nellis that took care of us. When you went in there, the day that you went in there and they finally said, you're getting, tomorrow, show up in uniform, you're going to be briefed in. And it had been a period of time. I signed in December 28th of 83. This is like the 1st of February. We have not worked in a month. We were on vacation in Vegas pretty much, except just checking in every day. We were off. And then they go in and they're like, show up at like 0700 tomorrow and get on a van and you're going to work. And It wasn't really that we were going to work, is that we were going somewhere to a secure facility to get briefed into what we were going to do. And the process and things that we had to go through just to find out what we were going to be doing was an eye-opening experience. And I don't know how much of that I can really talk about, but I can tell you, you knew you were in for something. I mean, it was beyond comprehension just to get briefed in for us at that time when we went up. And then they're like, tomorrow you're flying to work. Great.
How top secret was this work? Were you allowed to share anything with your wives and your
No.
wife?
We couldn't even talk about the weather. Eileen and I started dating 6 months after I got to Vegas, and we got married in 86. I was still uprange. When we got married, she knew I was an Air Force cop, and that is absolutely all she knew about what I did, except she knew I couldn't talk about it. And she was great about it, which I can't imagine somebody who has a spouse, especially young newlyweds, and you're like, don't you trust me? And it caused a lot of guys to get divorces. And she went with it. And she didn't know anything about what I did.
Yeah.
Imagine the feeling of isolation. You can't even talk about these things with your own spouse. You're at least supposed to be able to trust your own country. You're doing these things for national security. That is the one thing you can trust, is your own country to take care of you and to believe you. You can't even speak to your spouse about these certain things. You're going through these health issues, and even your own country's government is treating you like you're just a liar, and that this is about national security. Well, it's like, hey, I know a thing or two about national security. That's been my job the last 20 years, and that's how I've got this cancer in this case, these tumors.
And to this day, you still can't talk about 99% of what you did out there. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a lot that we can't talk about, but it's not that important. I mean, it was important then, and it may still be important now, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that important. I mean, it's cool to go to an air show and you'd see one of our jets, or you see a movie and you're like, I know about that. Or you see a movie and you're going, that's so wrong. I mean, there's a lot of pride in what goes into it and what went into it. But here's the thing. This is what's so unique, I think, about that assignment over everything else and all of the problems. I talked to those guys that I worked with back in the mid 80s every single day today. And long before we ever started The Invisible Enemy, once we got connected again, I talked to at least 2 or 3 people every single day that I worked with uprange.
Tell me what John McCain said about what you all did out there.
So after I got out of the service, I wanted to get involved in something that was important. And to me, politics is important. So John McCain, he came up to me. I became very involved and I got to know him, and probably know him differently than most others, because I got to know him on a much more personal level. And he came up to me one day, and we never talked about what I had done, but I knew he knew. He was on Senate Armed Services Committee, so he knew. And he came up to me and he says, your unit ended the Cold War. If you ever wanted a validation for what you did was important, that's just about it.
Think about that. He just said that your unit probably ended the Cold War. So talk about potentially being the reason for avoiding nuclear conflict, saving the world, and you're not taken care of.
And tell me, what can you tell me about what you were guarding out there?
Well, when I told you, like, when we first got briefed in, we got briefed into the stealth fighter. And since then, the other thing that's become public is that there was Russian MiGs up there. We had the real airplanes that our pilots would fly against. God forbid we all went to war. And they didn't tell you about that before you went up. I found out about that when that next day we flew up to work, and we flew in civilian chartered airline. And I'm sitting on the right side of the airplane, which, based on the direction that we were landing, was the proper side to be on, because we're looking out the window of the 727, and there sits a flight line full of Russian MiGs. And you're like, I'm in the United States Air Force. I'm supposedly going to a classified United States Air Force base. Those are not United States Air Force planes. And so that was really a trip, because you had no idea. And I can't imagine what all of us 18-year-old kids look like, 19-year-old kids look like, looking out the window going, not ours. But yeah, so that's what we got to see during the day, flying around. And at night, the F-117s would fly. So first time I saw an F-117 fly during the day, I was out of the service. So, but it was cool.
It was cool. I mean, it must have been such a position of pride.
Yeah, I mean, 100% that you're doing something that nobody else has done. The guys I went through tech school with, when I learned how to become a cop and took some other trainings that I went through, some of them ended up at Nellis, and I would see them at Nellis. And we were referred to as the ghost cops, because nobody knew what we did. They didn't know where we go. We were a very, very unique unit. Everybody in those units, you had to go through an interview process. You had to go through this background check. All of our pilots had to be not only gone to the fighter weapons school, which is like Top Gun, what Tom Cruise made famous. To get to that, you have to be in the top 10% of the pilots in the Air Force. To go up range, you had to be in the top 10% of the graduates of the fighter weapons school. So you had to be top 1% of the pilots. Every one of these people were amazing. The maintenance guys were amazing. I've talked to pilots and listened to what some of them have had to say about what their ground crews was. And one of them the other day was like, man, I never had to pre-flight my airplane. Or such and such did. And if he did it, it was good.
Tell me then about the shock of finding out that so many of your fellow veterans were getting sick and dying. How many have died so far?
So what we know of is, I think yesterday I added the 446th name to the list, and the average age for the guys is about 65.
Wow. So 446 individuals have passed away serving that same location. The average age at 65 years old. This is clearly something going on. This is what needs to be done in terms of PACT Act expansion. I know this new administration really wants to change things up. This is a great place to start. Of course, with adding to the list the efficiencies of the VA, making sure things get streamlined, that claims get approved in a reasonable time period. But you're talking about something that's so clearly obvious in terms of there's clearly something toxic here, there's an exposure, these people are getting sick, they're passing away way earlier than the average life expectancy. It should be a no-brainer.
I say guys a lot is it's maybe not the right word, but it's men and women that served up there, and men and women are dead. And we suspect that we probably know of about a third of the people that are dead that served up there during our generation of people at the various locations.
How does that hit your heart?
That's terrible. What's really terrible is to know that if they died as a result of their exposure from uprange, there is no benefit for their family. There's something called DIC benefits, and it's about $1,600 a month. It's not a lot of money, but when you lose your spouse and whatever income was there with your spouse, to go to nothing, and it was because of the job that they did.
The portion, let's look at this from the spouse's perspective. You're not told, let's say the wife or the husband of someone who's worked in this area at Groom Lake in this case, not even told the details of what they do. Hey, I can't talk about this. I can't talk about this. Gets sick, right? And you know in your heart that this is because of their work. Passes away early. And as the spouse, you're not even receiving any of those benefits that you should be entitled to, that you should be receiving. These should be service connected, and you should have surviving spouse benefits just like any other veteran would have that wasn't in this secret location, but you're left hanging out to dry.
And we all know the outcome for ourselves. DAV, Disabled American Veterans, is an advocate for us. And Eileen and I, and you've met Eileen, were in their office in their headquarters in DC, and they looked at Eileen and they said, he's going to die early. And we all look at that and we accept it. We maybe not happily, but it just is what it is. But I don't know what early means. Maybe it's 90.
Did you have any idea what you were exposed to?
Absolutely none. In fact, you knew that nuclear tests had taken place down south of us, but we would joke about it, but at the same time, you felt confident that your government wasn't going to send you somewhere knowingly to harm you.
And tell me about that. What did the government know? And
everything. And when I say that, prior to my base that I was stationed at was built, the federal government did an assessment, environmental assessment, and it's a nearly 100-page document. And in that document, they identified that where I was specifically was contaminated with plutonium-239. Plutonium-239 is what's in 90% of the nuclear warheads that they tested. They found that we had plutonium, uranium, depleted uranium, beryllium, I can't pronounce it right, but like americium, and one other.
Here's what really pisses me off is just the government knows that they're sending their people in there with plutonium-239 to go get exposed and to go pass away early. They knew that.
There were 6 radioactive isotopes that were there and that are throughout the range.
Why did they decide to still send people there?
Because it's the least populated place in the United States. They had started activities out on the range, on NTTR, in World War II. It was a bombing range. Where I worked was a bombing range.
What specifically did they say justified sending people out there?
The benefit to national security outweighed the future environmental liability.
And how does that hit your heart today?
Pisses you off. It pisses you off because the country's a big place, and if you want to find a place to go do something like the nature that we did, then find it. It's necessary.
They also know that part of the agreement that you signed in your enlistment is If you get injured, if you have conditions as a result of your military service, you shall be compensated for these conditions. So when you're in the service, you are not allowed to disobey a direct order. You're not allowed to breach your terms of enlistment, right? You could land yourself in Leavenworth. You can even commit treason. You could be put to death in certain cases. So then why is the government able to knowingly send you off to go get conditions, knowingly not compensate you for said conditions, despite that being in direct violation of the agreement of enlistment? Why is it one-sided?
Things need to be done sometimes in the darkness of night, if you will, out of prying eyes. But to do it somewhere because it was convenient, which is basically what they say, because it was convenient, isn't okay. And there have been people working out there since World War II to this day, and they all will see the same fate as me.
Does it feel like a betrayal?
It is 100%. Average age of death of the people on our list is 65. That is not the average life expectancy of a U.S. man or woman.
And so tell me what happens when you and your fellow vets who served out there are getting sick, going to the VA, and the VA then has to contact the DoD to confirm that you served on a contaminated site, and the DoD is sending back these records that say data masked, data masked, data masked. Tell me more about that. They're refusing to they confirm that you served, but they're refusing to confirm where.
Correct. The VA will call the DoD to confirm duty location and exposure. And in all of our cases, they will not confirm we were ever stationed anywhere where there was a contaminant. That our time at Nellis, we weren't anywhere that was exposed, nor do they confirm. The DoD's official line is that on NTTR, the U.S. military has never been stationed there.
Do you buy that because of national security, because of how top secret this work was, that they truly cannot confirm that information?
No, I don't believe that. I believe it's CYA. Cover their behinds. Because a private business, I would go to jail if I did what they did.
That's a good point. If this was a private business, you would go to jail for doing what you did, right? And I know it's not, right? This is the military. That's why it's an enlistment contract. At the very least, you have to follow that contract and the enlistment on both sides. If you, as the troop, if you are in breach of that contract, you get sent to jail. You could be put even to death. It doesn't go the other way around.
Because a private business, I would go to jail if I did what they did. I have several different theories. You can argue that maybe it's the military industrial complex, because there's a lot of money. There's a lot of projects. There's a lot of things that have gone on and continue to go on. And it's maybe not so watched place. Okay. I think, again, I'm not going to argue the validity of doing things, because the weapons systems and things that have come out of there are truly significant. Not just ours, but others are truly significant things. And we have to have a place to do those things. But to do those things knowing the outcome, and the outcome is undeniable. We're not here to prove our illnesses are related. We don't have to. The Department of Energy employees already proved that.
It boggles the mind that Department of Energy workers who were on that exact same site alongside you, who actually had less exposure than all of you did, are being provided for. They are presumptively exposed to all the radiation and all of the toxins out there. They are covered. They're widows. The widowers are being covered. And you all are not. Tell me more about that.
So the best way to put it, and you brought it up a little bit, that I tell people, the person that cooked the cheeseburger in the chow hall for me, when I'd go in and get something to eat, is covered. If they've had problems, they have lifetime medical, and they've received financial compensation up to $400,000. The guys that would go out and build the hangars that I had to guard have been compensated, and we can't be. And I don't buy the national security thing. I don't buy the data mask thing anymore. And none of us, nobody that
Mhm.
worked out there, everybody takes great pride in the job that we did. Um,
Why is it a national security threat for us to compensate our own veterans in the Department of Defense, but it's not a national security threat for us to compensate the Department of Energy workers that were exposed to the same toxic exposure, albeit to a lesser degree? This is kind of what I'm not buying. And this is why people say, hey, we're treating veterans last. It's veterans last. Just because this is a population that is so unselfish that will put their name on the dotted line, treat everyone with the utmost respect, in my experience, these are how the veterans are, and put everyone before themselves, service before self, my unit before self, my brother or sister in arms before self. And then finally, okay, now I can think about my own family. And it's not going to happen. Department of Energy, same exact location. They were presumptively essentially service connected, right? It's a different term. But the Department of Energy is getting compensated. Their family's getting taken care of, but not the veterans. This is what needs to change.
well, sometimes you'll find people that say they might regret it. You can't, I don't look at it, I don't regret it. I could have never predicted then what's happened now. At the same time, I've had a great life, and that got me here. So it's not about, even to me, it's not even about regrets, but it's about the fact that the folks that work for the Department of Energy out there have been taken care of. You put us in a place that you knew would harm us. All we're asking for is the benefits that anybody exposed to the same things anywhere else would be entitled to. Same with the DoD employees. They would be entitled to benefits that they can't claim.
And here's the point, right? Even if all of these veterans were properly compensated, obviously they should be, the government knowingly put them in the situation knowing they would get sick. That is still not a fair trade. Are you telling me that, let's say, $4,500 a month even, is worth having a veteran pass away 15 years early, having a veteran's quality of life diminish, having a veteran's, sons, daughters be born and carry this illness for life? Of course not. That's not even worth it, but that's the least you could do because that's the agreement.
Because they weren't there, they weren't exposed.
How does it feel to be told that you were not there when you showed up every single day?
I I don't even take offense to it because it's just ludicrous. It is just ludicrous to say that. The insanity is just to simply deny it, the existence of anything. People know. And we're not trying to get famous. We're saying just do what you should do. And that's why I found out the best way to doing that was to get a law introduced to Congress. That's what we're going through. That's what we're doing. And we'll be successful. Because if anybody listens to our story, it's awful.
This is what we need to pay attention to, is these laws getting introduced into Congress. Okay, call your local senator, your local congressperson, if you support some of these, because just like the PACT Act, there's a lot of momentum right now behind toxic exposure and recognizing these veterans who we pretended didn't exist, who we pretended, were just faking the entire time. There's lots of momentum behind that. I want to see this open up. I want to see this open up for jet fuel exposure. A lot of you working in the motor pool and were exposed to these different fuels. I want to see this a lot for firemen who are exposed to these, fire retardants, these extinguisher, these chemicals. This is what can happen if we seize this moment and really pay attention, because this is happening.
No matter, we got to do the cool kid stuff. There's no doubt about that. I take great pride in that. Everybody does. We did what nobody else got to do, saw things nobody else will ever see, and find out about things hopefully nobody ever hears about. But don't just turn a blind eye and use that as your excuse to not give somebody the benefits that they sadly earned.
I know one of your fellow vets and your friends, Pomp Braswell, describes being sent there as a death sentence. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it is. It's a huge unknown, but there's no way that it can't affect you. I've had way too many problems that are too unique.
What are you experiencing now health-wise? And tell me about your kids as well.
So my oldest son has neurofibromatosis. My second son had something called hypospadias, which was an issue that was corrected with surgery when he was a baby. I think he was about 6 months old when he had surgery. And his issue was able to be corrected. My number 3 child, my daughter, is a rare form of arthritis that is a autoimmune deficiency issue that we think now she's pretty much always had. And it was an arthritis I'd never even heard of before. And the uniqueness of that is that many, many of the other people that I talk to, their kids have autoimmune issues, symptoms like lupus, kind of a lupus type of illnesses. And they all say, yeah, my kid's got this really rare autoimmune disorder. Well, I don't think it's that rare for us. My youngest daughter has a lot of female problems that she has to deal with, and she'll have, as her and her husband go forward to having babies and stuff, that she's going to have things to face. Many of the women that served up range have had huge female problems. One lady that I know of has had stage 4 cancer 4 times of female stuff. I'm no doc, and I don't want to get into it too much, but
so you call them the most innocent victims in all of this. Out of your 4 children, how many of them have serious health issues?
All 4 have had issues. 1 was corrected. We don't know of anything else, but the other 3 have serious health issues.
Yeah. And tell me about your son, Dave Crete, the third.
So David was born with neurofibromatosis, which we were told was a genetic disorder. So we went through a geneticist. When he was born at the base hospital at Nellis, we mentioned that he had a lot of cafe au lait spots. At the time, we called them birthmarks. And
all over his body. I
remember
he had like seeing 47. Those photos.
By the time he was 8 months old, he had 150.
Wow. Think about the guilt as a father, knowing that you were coming home, bringing in this toxic sludge, altering the genetic makeup of your bloodline, having your daughters, your sons suffering permanently from this, and knowing that as a father that you are going to pass away early and there's nothing you're going to be able to do and leave behind for your family.
But it's really incredible. I mean, Eileen's had 3 miscarriages. Hopefully she doesn't get any other side effects.
How common were the miscarriages on the base?
We've learned it's pretty much everybody had miscarriages. It was super common. I don't want to overstate, but it's super common. That's one of the things when people tell me, I haven't had any issues. I ask them 2 questions. Were you married? And if they were married, I ask them, did your wife have a miscarriage? And do you have tumors? And I would bet 50 to 75% of the time, the answer to at least one of those questions was yes. And often both. And that's the eye-opening point for people when they realize this. And then they start to go through, well, I got the shakes. I have, Parkinson'sism, which is like a Parkinson's, but I don't have Parkinson's, but I get the shakes. And that'll come up and people will be like, oh yeah, I've got that, or, by the way, I've got this, or in the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I got an email from somebody going, I'm going down to the VA and I'm having issues, and I found that your Facebook group, The Invisible Enemy. Now I'm questioning things because all of a sudden I'm having weird things going on, and she was upranged from 89 to 92.
Explain to me the ripple effects, because there were men who were serving up there who would just be caked in this dust, and they would come home and they would do what?
One of the things, so we would, especially for us, and when I started all of this discovery, I really, really believed it was going to be primarily just the cops, because we're that infantry side of things up there as well. And so we'd be out rolling around in the dust and using our weapons and practicing and crawling up the hills and stuff and being soldiers, being airmen, but being soldiers. Some may take offense to that, but that's more of what we were. And you would be caked. Your boots would be caked. It would be ground in. The one thing that we always found unusual, and this came even from our NCOs that had been in the real Air Force before they went up range. We all learned that the range wasn't the real Air Force. But we would have those OD green t-shirts that would go under our fatigues, right? We had the old jungle fatigues like you see from all the way back to Vietnam. So we had those. Our t-shirts would all turn purple. And we would bring all that home. We'd stick it all in our bag. And when Eileen would do my laundry, you pull it out, all that dust comes up. Because, I mean, sometimes it would be a mess. You know, it just depended on what our activities included for that week while we were at work.
How do you feel knowing that you were tracking this home to your family, that your genetic material may have been changing in a way that was going to affect your son, affect your children? I mean, how does that weigh on you?
For me, it's the worst. That's the worst part. Like I said, I'm happy with the life that I've had. I've had a great life. I have amazing kids. You've met my family. They're great people. You know, my kids are all very successful in their own rights. You know, I've got a family that's got a lot of law enforcement behind it. All of their health issues is from me because of my job.
That really makes you think. That really makes you think. The Agent Orange exposure, you know, by the time we finally got around to admitting that, oh, hey, that was a problem, that was causing you some conditions, we're going to go ahead and presumptively service connect as a country. You know, most of the Vietnam vets had already passed, and this is what we cannot allow to happen with, you know, this generation moving forward. This needs to be acted on quickly because, as you can see, they're passing away. More and more widows are being created each day. And I want to know your thoughts. What should be done? Who are we protecting right now with not providing these veterans the benefit of the doubt that, hey, yes, you were exposed to these toxic exposures. And I know it's not enough to pay you this currency, but that's the least we can do, right? Who are we protecting? Because it looks like it's not our veterans.
And that's hard. That's why I started this, is I wanted to find out why my son was sick, why my son was born with something. And then to find out why all of my kids, there seems to be a pretty good connection. And then I talked to the other people with, you know, guys who have kids, you know, with spina bifida and all these horrible things. You know, and some of the folks have, their kids have already died from the issues that they were born with. On all of us, it's the same. We wouldn't have the life we had if we didn't work out there. And, you know, you can't regret tomorrow from yesterday kind of thing, you know, because yesterday made your tomorrow. I believe that. But at the same time, had you not have worked up there, none of your kids would have these problems.
I don't have to tell you, though, that it wasn't your fault. You know that.
But when you're laying there at 2 a.m., you think about it. You know, take your kid to the doctor and you think about it. I didn't think about it with David when he was 2. Think about it every day now.